Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Maine Fish and Wildlife class. My name is Mr. Delcourt, and I'll be your teacher this semester. I'm really excited to have everybody on board here, doing this thing remotely, and really looking forward to keeping it as close as possible to the regular experience that we have in the classroom. Today, we're going to just do a brief introduction of the class and a little bit of how this semester is going to work, some of the apps you'll need. We'll briefly start to think about wildlife a little bit and get ready to really jump in next time around. So again, welcome. Really excited to get going this semester, and I'm really hopeful that this class will change the way that you look at wildlife, and that's my goal for all students in Maine Fish and Wildlife. I'm hoping that at the end of the semester, you walk away thinking about wildlife differently. That can mean a lot of different things for different people. Some of you guys may show up having very little experience in the outdoors and very little experience with wildlife, and others may be already super passionate and knowledgeable. But no matter what, I'm hopeful that you all walk away with kind of a refreshed new view on wildlife, their value to us, and how we manage them here in Maine and across the country. So the first thing we should do today is make sure that we're all set up for success, that we have the apps we need to be successful this semester. So really, there's only a couple apps, or 3 apps, I believe, that you're really going to need to be successful on a daily basis, in my opinion, in here. The first of which is Google Classroom, which, if you're watching this video, chances are you're already logged in, you're signed up for the class, everything's good to go there. But all of the class materials, the notes, everything, all of these videos will be linked to Google Classroom. That's the platform I use for all of my classes, and you're definitely going to want to be all set up in Google Classroom to succeed and maximize your opportunities in the class. So Google Classroom is an absolute must. Now, a strong suggestion for the app I like to use to complete worksheets and take notes would be Notability. It allows you to scribe in there with your finger or type notes. And it's just a really helpful app. The thing I really like about Notability for things like assignments is that it saves automatically as you go. Some of the other apps that people use, or even Google Classroom, if you're working on assignments directly in Google Classroom, we'll have kids run into that nightmare scenario where you do an entire assignment and lose it. That just doesn't happen in Notability. So if you don't have Notability, you want to get that, and you want to get used to uploading your note sheets and assignments throughout the semester to Notability. Do them there, and then move them over to Google Classroom to submit once you're done. So Notability is really strongly suggested by me, and you can see right here my note sheet that we're going to use throughout Unit 1 that I'll be filling in with you is found right here in Notability. I've uploaded it, and we'll be working on these notes together. We'll even jump in here in a little bit and get going on that. And then finally, Nearpod is an app that some of you have probably used in other classes that I strongly suggest for my class. If we do get together in person, I use Nearpod almost exclusively when introducing new material. I just find it really helpful to have my presentations up on your screen so that you can see small font and you can really follow along and have your notes out on your desk in front of you. But I think Nearpod would even be helpful from the at-home route as well. So I think Google Classroom, Notability, and Nearpod are the 3 apps you're really going to need to succeed in this class moving forward. If you don't have any of those now, I would pause this video and I would go and download those onto your iPad so that you're set up and ready to succeed moving forward. Okay, so hopefully you've got those 3 apps. If not, you've already paused and downloaded them, and we're back up and running here. What we need to do next is take that Unit 1 notes file posted under Google Classroom and upload that to Notability, which I've already done. And again, pause here and accomplish that if need be. If not, if you've already got it in there and you're ready to move on, then we're good to go. But if not, make sure you pause and get yourself to a good spot. Get that note sheet uploaded to Notability so you're ready to succeed for the semester. So today, we're going to keep it real simple. We're going to start to just think about wildlife. What is wildlife? Before we can move forward in this class, we should be able to define that term. And when I say wildlife, we should know what we're talking about. The tricky thing here is that wildlife is a very broad definition. It can encompass a wide array of things. So wildlife to us in this class is going to be any living organism that is undomesticated, meaning it is not tamed by people. Domestic creatures like cats and dogs and cows and horses and things like that rely solely upon human support for survival. Many of them have been created through selective breeding. I think of my own dog. I have a little long-haired Chihuahua, and that's about the most domesticated thing you could ever imagine, right? It's a tiny little dog that would not survive in nature. It's been created by people through selective breeding to accomplish a specific task of sitting on your lap and making you feel happy, I guess. She's pretty good at it. But that's a classic domestic creature. So we don't consider dogs and things like that wildlife. Those are domestic organisms. So wildlife have to be undomesticated, and they are also, the final caveat here is that they're living within an ecosystem. So that's another fancy way of kind of being like in the wild. So if you go to the zoo and you look at a tiger in the zoo, it may satisfy the fact that it's a living organism. It's a non-domesticated organism, theoretically. But if it's not living within an ecosystem, it may not fit that bill of true wildlife. So a tiger at a zoo or at the Tiger King's compound in Oklahoma, you may not be looking at true wildlife there. That's kind of that borderline between domesticated organisms, especially tigers that would have been bred in captivity from generations of captive tigers. So we run into some issues with definitions there. But if you really look into this definition, it's super broad. We're talking about an all-encompassing definition that includes trees and moss and bugs and plankton in a pond and or algae, and I mean any living organism, not domesticated, living within an ecosystem. Many people immediately think of the big furry stuff, deer and moose and bears, and those are all awesome and certainly some of the things that immediately come to mind for me. But wildlife is a much more all-encompassing term, and there's a term I'm going to use going forward in this class. I don't need you to necessarily know it for a test, but it's a term I love and you'll hear in wildlife circles a lot, and I'm going to write it right up here so you guys can have it. Maybe you can write it down too. Charismatic megafauna. That's a term I first learned at the University of Maine as a freshman in the wildlife ecology program. My professors used to throw that around. Charismatic megafauna. When we talk about charismatic megafauna, we're talking about big, cuddly looking, lovable creatures. And people love to use charismatic megafauna as their poster children for wildlife, right? When we say the word wildlife, what comes to mind? Things like lions and tigers and bears and whales and deer, like as we said, big furry stuff. They're all charismatic megafauna. Maybe those little beetles living in the tree bark behind your house. Those don't immediately come to mind as wildlife in most cases. But they certainly are according to our definition. So I love that term, charismatic megafauna, and they tend to get all the publicity because they're charismatic, right? They're lovable and they're big, but it's important to realize that's just a tiny sliver of the wildlife pie, those big furry cuddly looking guys. So there you have it. Any living organism that is undomesticated, living within an ecosystem, and you've got wildlife, an extremely broad definition that we'll kind of use going forward. I may check in with you and say, now is that wildlife? Is that wildlife? And does it fit our definition? So there you go. There's your charismatic megafauna. Now, I mentioned earlier, the end goal of this class is I really want to change the way that you think about wildlife. I want you to think about and approach wildlife differently, no matter what your background is. And in order to do that, we immediately in this class start to kind of self-reflect and think to ourselves, how do we characterize wildlife? What are wildlife to me? And one of the things I love to point out, and it's going to be part of your activity you're going to do after we sign off from the video here today, is to start to think about some of the cultural things we do with wildlife, some of the things that happen to us as kids growing up that shape the way we view and look at wildlife totally subconsciously. We don't even realize it. And there's an important word here, another one that we don't necessarily need to know for a test or anything, but a great word to throw around, and people will be impressed if you know. And that word is anthropomorphism. And that means, anthro means people, morphism means, to change form or whatever. And to anthropomorphism is to assign human traits to wildlife or any non-living thing. You could anthropomorphize anything, and we anthropomorphize a lot of things in our society. In this case, we'll focus right on wildlife. But there are so many examples of anthropomorphism in our society. We're constantly guilty of it with our pets especially. If you hear somebody talk about their dog, for example, most people speak about and think about their dog as a very human-like thing, when in reality it's not. It's a dog. We're anthropomorphizing by assigning them human traits and deciding what they like and don't like and things like that. We don't know necessarily how they think or feel. And for today's activity, once we sign off here in just a minute or two, you're going to watch the opening scene of Lion King. That's a movie that came out when I was a kid, and it has really, really resonated in our society. Everybody's seen Lion King. We all know Simba and Mufasa and all these characters. There's a long-running Broadway show, and they just recently released that live-action Lion King and got it back in our consciousness again. But the Lion King and really any other Disney, production or any Hollywood production involving cartoony animals especially, there is a ton of anthropomorphism. And I want you to watch that clip in a few minutes and see if you can pick out areas of anthropomorphism. Now, initially, it'll start out really nice and kind of depicting these creatures in natural behaviors in a natural place. And by the end of that video, it starts to kind of get a little weird in terms of the anthropomorphism going on, where these creatures are acting very human-like. They're smiling and just bowing to each other and doing all kinds of crazy human things that creatures on the African savanna, they just don't do. So one of the goals of this class is over the course of the semester, we're going to constantly be finding areas of anthropomorphism and thinking about, is this a correct scientific view of these creatures? Is this truly how they behave? And in many ways, that's the number one thing that'll change in a student throughout this class, is they begin to view wildlife more scientifically and are a little more cautious around this practice of anthropomorphism in wildlife. So just a really cool word. It's initially, right off the bat, I show this video on the first day of class every year, every semester, because it really hits home when you watch it with that consciousness, looking for that anthropomorphism. It starts to make you go, oh yeah, I can see how my entire life I've been maybe inched towards this anthropomorphic behavior. I mean, I think about movies like Bambi and all these other Hollywood films that involve wildlife. Anthropomorphism runs rampant, and we inevitably kind of become guilty of that over time. So watch that Lion King clip after this is all over. Look for anthropomorphism. There's not necessarily an assignment to go with it. It's just a fun little few minutes to watch and reminisce, and a good song too, not gonna lie. So I'm really glad you guys were able to tune in today on day one of the class. I really look forward to getting together with you next time. We're gonna continue on our note sheet here, and we're gonna start to think about the various ways that wildlife are valuable to us, because as certainly there are tons of different ways wildlife are valuable. I mean, we've got an entire course devoted to them. So looking forward to getting back together with you here next time, and I really appreciate you tuning in today.